sorry. Sorry. Come. Oh, I'm sorry. Come. Because I will
Okay, I think we should really start, so have a seat, please.
Yeah, the problem will be if I have to go in that direction. I will figure out something.
Now, I think that we should think about, we should organize this morning in the following way. In the first part, maybe an hour or a little less than that if possible, I would like to outline what should be the legal issues that we have to explore with further and serious research in order to see what can be the strategies and the possibilities and the constraints in which we are moving forward in this project. And then in the second part, we should actually try to outline a roadmap for actually our work so that we can think about the networking which is necessary, the organization that can be involved, the steps that have to be moved in order to make this thing happen. That is to say, to be ready by April with the actual charter and with the first idea of the energies that will be involved in the collecting of the signatures and to try to make this thing visible. Okay, so I will divide this thing in these two ways. Now I had a little bit of thought yesterday and I think we should do some further research on a variety of the issues that we explored in the morning. In particular, I think that we have to clarify what kind of legal act we're looking for. And on this point, I kind of had some thoughts myself last night, and I believe that we should be carefully considering the idea of proposing a directive rather than a regulation because of the dimension of national law that is involved and that we've seen involved in this process. So if we can imagine some sort of a directive that requires member states to grant access to communities, to commons, and to protect effectively in a way that is comparable with the protection of property rights or something like that. I'm really kind of thinking loudly right now. But working on this idea that we propose a directive which is already, as you know very well, those that are lawyers at least know very well, that is an actual instrument that works in terms of bite, but allows some possibilities to mobilizing an activity at the level of member states in order to transform the national legal systems in a way which is coherent with what we want here. It seems to me that could be something that allows for flexibility and more space also for political activism at the member state level. But this is, this should be actually explored a little bit. Another point that should be explored that I would like not to let fall completely is the path that is feasible to initiate a transformation of the structure of the treaties. In other words, of empowering what would be the correct way to empower the European Parliament in 2014 to play a role in allowing an open discussion about the commons and in allowing the people of Europe to actually have a discussion during the next campaign that is not only based on the proposal of transformations that will arrive and that are going to be done in the next few weeks. We think biased from power, but also something in the interest of the people. And that is something that I think requires also a little bit more research to see how the mechanism really works in practice, and whether there are some shadows, some areas that we can force a little bit to go in that direction. Also, we should consider the issue of the legal basis that we briefly discussed yesterday. And I think that we should also consider whether we want to have two documents rather than one. You know, one that aims at failure and one that aims at success, so that we can maintain the possibility of suing in the court of law in case in which it's rejected after the first 100,000 signatures, which would be a good strategy, it seems to me. You know, you get the signatures, you get rejected. For example, you work on a legal action, and meanwhile you propose another one that is slightly amended for getting the signature. So we have to consider creatively the possibilities, and lawyers are quite creative from this point of view. You know, people usually think that lawyers are not creative. Actually, lawyers are highly creative in producing ways to introduce different and varied strategies in order to reach a certain advocating result. So it seems to me that that is also something that we should explore further, and that will require some actual research, looking on the precedents and stuff. I know that Jill, so let's start discussing a little bit about this. Jill, I know that had some thoughts herself, and maybe she wants to share them with us now, and then the floor is open for a little bit, and then we go to the second phase. Okay. Collective reclaim.
Okay. Good morning. I was just suggesting, Ugo, that it should be interesting for your project to explore the idea of collective claims. Because we have it in the European Social Charter after 31st allow for collective claims, and I think this should be the way for the commons and not individual claims. And the second one is, there was yesterday an extremely interesting article in the Repubblica. I am unable to translate in English, so I'm going to just read something. It has been written by Gustavo Zagrebelski, and it is extremely interesting, analyzing how the constitutional right could incorporate the idea of duties and responsibilities to protect the future generations, rather than only protecting subjective rights of people who exist there. And he has extremely interesting ideas on what he called el diritto prognostico e el principio de precauzione. I think both could be as well extremely interesting in terms of the project. But I think it's worth it to read it, and maybe, you know, as a suggestion.
Yeah, I think that in the actual drafting, the dimension of the duty will be central for sure, because we really said that we don't want a declaration, another charter of rights, so there should be some important duty dimension, there should be the collective dimension, there should be the interest of the future generation. All of those stuff are already embryonically there, and so in the redrafting we can kind of try to make it a little more effective. The collective claim, I think, is Article 31 of the Social Charter, and that could be probably, and it's about the right to housing, I think. And it's probably one of the bases. We identified as possible bases the usual stuff on the environment, the transportation, and this could be a third basis that links the project to actual European provisions. So, any thoughts on that? Please.
Yeah. I think that I think that your questions were obviously very quantitative. So what you have to decide, decide about legal basis and other support. But first of all, I think we have to start from thinking what the scope of our action, whether this legal act has to cover all the issues that are covered by the concept of commons, or whether we want to first start from, let's call it a flagship initiative, focusing on one of them, like it was water in Italy or other things like that, so that the legal act can be more precise at the first, in the first moment. I think this is an issue that maybe we can discuss a bit on.
Please, go ahead.
I'm Ulrich Steg, and I'm in the clinical program here in IAC, but I'm talking more from my experience from Brussels. So I can give you some bureaucratic eyes on this. I think it is quite useful to think. The legal basis is always one of the most important issues that they discuss all the time. When a legal act comes out, the legal basis is the most important issue. Unfortunately, this is the case. But we have to really think about the legal case. I think the idea to have a flagship proposal, maybe as a directive, coming out with a name comments, with a definition comments inside, could already something very, very sexy, very exciting. But it could not be the entire aim of this work. I think it must be more a political debate and a political flagship coming on the same side as a political activity, like we said, as endorsing the European Parliament in 2014, really to look on a charter of European Parliament, something like this. But I think there's maybe two different issues that might be put on the same angle, but maybe pushed forward at the same time, but maybe on two different paths. I think legal basis, we should be very flexible and very. I mean, it's precise in the treaty. It's very precise stated what the Commission can do, and I'm sure that they will really look on the legal provisions that we use and look what kind of details this legal act is really fulfilling. Otherwise, there are a lot of examples in the past of the European Union that legal bases were just opened up by the European Commission, by the European Parliament, and so on. I think we can use this kind of method as well. There are a lot of examples, let's say the Civil Code example or something like this. There has never been a legal provision like this, but now they are proceeding for a SAY code. So there is space for it. Let's be creative and let's put everything in this kind of legal act. I think there can be, but we have to do it a real work on the legal provision, on a legal basis. I think this is something important. And then the last point that I would like to say is that I'm sure there is something that we not really discussed here, but what this European Citizen Initiative is about is just that we push the Commission to propose something. But then it comes to the real legal development in the European Parliament and the legal battle, let's say, in the European Parliament and in the Council of the European Union. And what the past has shown us very often, the legal proposal from the directive proposal from the Commission might be seen as a very interesting paper. But then it came out after this battle. It was diluted by the Council completely and by the European Parliament, because lobby groups are fighting there very much. So what we propose can be something very interesting, but what's come out can be something really diluted. And I think that is something we have to keep in mind. With the European Citizen Initiative, we're not sure at all that we will have all elements, important elements that we would like to have in this paper at the end.
No, but we are all mature lawyers, and we know very well that we are interested in the process and in the language and in the kind of activism that this thing can be part of within an attempt to create a constituent moment, right? So it's clearly something that that things should not go all the way through in a bureaucratic way. Otherwise, there is no point of doing all of this. Just one bit of information. On the 12th and 13th of December, I think there is in Naples an actual meeting of the water people. Which is working with, we're working within the same framework, so this is the same kind of stuff. But I'm pretty sure that the water movement will actually be keen in doing something that is specific on water, also at the European level, which is very good that happens, and which will be. So there will be already some sort of the flagship, whatever initiative.
And in the next days, the mayor of Naples will launch for the 28th of January this meeting of local governments named Comuni network of the local government for the commons. In Italian sounds better. So it will be also a new opportunity to discuss and to recruit more administration supporting also this process.
So I think that
no, in accordance with the results of referendum, no, mainly, but it's also an occasion and opportunity to discuss this issue.
Sure.
And you are everybody invited, naturally.
So that is going to be, so there is going to be a natural pluralism of initiatives, and I don't think we have to strategize too much. I mean, on this, obviously the interesting thing here is, to introduce the notion, the concept, and to work in a way that is relevant, significant, and interesting from also the legal point of view of how you develop a vision of private law that is not based on property, basically, and state, right? So how do you create a beginning of a legal system, and what are the requirements of a beginning of a legal system that rejects the binary opposition property-state and tries to produce law in a different philosophy. So that's something that we should reflect on the charter. On the other hand, I think there was a very good point that emerged yesterday when we were talking about the sort of fundamental target of what we're looking for. And it's really about keeping the corporate interests outside of certain areas. So the assumption that corporate interests are per se non-sustainable, short-sighted, extractive, and therefore the fall of the commons. And so that it seems to me that there should be there is a moment of inclusion for sure in the governance of the commons, but there is also a moment of exclusion, which is excluding certain kind of interest and certain kind of philosophies and certain kind of practices that by definition are not able to take care of the public interest. There was a very, very interesting decision that was just published by the Constitutional Court 3 days ago or 4 days ago, in which it declared unconstitutional a local law of the Lombardia region that had created a 100% publicly controlled corporation, but still with the corporate structure. So a for-profit corporation whose shares are all belonging to the government, to the regional government, and has granted to that institution the ownership of the water, network. Okay, and the Constitutional Court said, no, that's unconstitutional because even if it's 100% owned by the public, it's still a shareholder corporation and therefore is a private law structure, and that is incompatible with the running of the. So that was a big victory of the argument that we've been carrying on during the referendum, that is not public what is run by a corporate structure, and the decision was deposited just 3 or 4 days ago in the decision of November 23, and that's a very, very encouraging, because it shows how, you see, the law in a way works incrementally and in a more, but works in a direction that is coherent with certain kind of things that were decided by the referendum. and it was the referendum. It's a very articulated decision, and while the political system is kind of ignoring what happened, however, once you put a legal instrument in, there is its own life. And the life of Europe, in a way, has been pretty much going on that way too. There are all the moments in which it looked like everything was falling apart. However, right now there is already a legal system that is incrementally producing integration, let alone whether it's the kind of integration we like or not. But certainly, once you start a process legally, then there is an autopoietic kind of happening that goes in a certain direction. So the point is to indicate the right direction and put the machine in practice. Yeah. Orazio.
Thank you. Well, I wasn't here yesterday, so I may be saying things that are very obvious and have already been said. So first of all,
never say obvious things.
Thank you very much for having me anyway, and I'm sorry in advance if it's redundant. So thinking of what you've just been saying, and to going back to the question of what type of legal act. Obviously, I agree with you. If you're choosing between a directive and a regulation, it's better to have a directive for all the reasons you chose. And why not? That's an operational thing. The only thing that I would be worried about is that, to a certain extent, putting a charter type of declaration into a directive is a form of trivialization. I would be worried about that. And it's not necessary, it doesn't necessarily exclude it, but there must be other ways of showing that, in fact, all the instruments that already exist, including collective claims and the social charter, what's already in the treaties, what's already in national constitutions, it can already, all that is totally indeterminate in reality, and it can all be used. And I was just wondering whether we could look at what the Accounting for Hunger people are doing. There are some very interesting moves turning private law on its head and saying, well, if you are exercising private power, then let's use private law tools. If you are doing some transnational thing, then let's use state responsibility, for instance. I mean, why aren't we thinking of that? So, I don't know, I think if you're thinking of a directive, yes, but it's got to be accompanied by things which show that we don't believe that the commons are only in a directive, because if the directive doesn't work, then where are the commons, right? So it has to be embedded in more foundational texts.
Yeah, so that's why we were thinking. I think I totally share your point. I mean, I would go even further. It's not the law will never be enough to assert the commons. At least the law is officially produced by official sources.
Yeah.
However, there is a big educational work to be done with the law, and this is something that we discussed a little bit with Gilda this morning too. To how we've been looking at in comparative law. We've been looking a lot as the educational function of law as typical of the Soviet legal system or as Maoism or things like that, because there is this idea of education as a top-down kind of exercise, right? So I use the law to educate you, like, I hang you so that I educate all the others. Yet there is something to say on the peer-to-peer dimension that the commons are introducing in the picture, and therefore also the peer-to-peer education that the law can have in the moment in which is law coming up from the bottom up, from the people's feeling of injustice, for the all kind of thing that what we could call the people's rule of law, something like that, right? Something that comes down from the bottom. And so it would be important probably to, so it is, of course it's not the directive only, it's not even the law only. It needs to be accompanied by an awareness of what the law is about and an awareness of the kind of transformations in order to create a peer-to-peer law. That's why, for example, with Gilda, the idea was to produce together with this some sort of small guide on these issues, of the commons of the peer-to-peer, to publish in a variety of languages, to circulate during the campaign, and really to talk to the future generation. Because if we're talking about future generation, we should talk to future generation, and we should try to create now future generations that are keener in taking obligations themselves than the ones we are educating now by, as little consumers or something like that. So there is that side of information, and there is, of course, the side of political activism, and all of these are a variety of things that have to go together. But the hope is that the things, you cannot really decide that these things are going to happen. If really if the moment is politically ripe for the commons, as it was politically right for water in Italy, then maybe these things will happen. If not, it's just a little step. We're moving in the right direction, and we're gonna die capitalist, I think. But who knows? Please.
I have a question for the House, and I think anybody can react. It's regarding the choice of the nature of the act, whether we should go for regulation or directive. I agree that directive is more operative and it gives more autonomy to states in order to adopt the legal act to their peculiarities. And it also gives some sort of discretion on the method of implementing the act. But if we are going for immediate enforcement of whatever we have in the initiative, I think the directives do not help us, because as far as direct applicability of directives is concerned, there has been one problem. We have vertical direct applicability, which is that an individual can claim on the basis of the directive against a member state in national courts, and that is possible under directives. But the question is horizontal direct applicability. Can an individual claim against a member state? No, against an individual or a private entity in a member state. And as far as I know, various ECJ jurisprudence show that horizontal direct applicability is not possible under directives. So that could affect the enforceability of rights in the initiative. So how do you see this, and do you have any other additional justifications or advantages that you see in directives instead of going for regulations?
This is actually a very, very good question, and I think it's one of the issues that we will have to balance, in deciding the strategy. Because clearly you get some advantages, that you get some less stiffness and less, top-down kind of activity, but you lose something, as you're saying. However, the law is not static. So right now there is, Facinidori, a dotted line of cases that say no horizontal, but things change rapidly also on that point of view. So the law is not really static, and because we are focusing on a process rather than on the outcome, it seems to me that this is kind of something that we have to consider, but we should not consider that as a minor reason of concern. It depends on how, and I think you see that in the vision of the law as a commons, so in a broader understanding of an ecology of law, diversity and resilience are very important aspects to be considered. Are very important because they are contextual, they are mobilizing, they are things that really actually are the denial of the top-down structure. So the regulation is really, I'm Europe, I'm the strong gorilla, I'm telling to you states, you do this. Which today is really happening, in some really important ways, like, deciding the governments and little things like that, which I'm not sure that is particularly compatible with the idea of open democracy, of new constituent processes. So, that's defeating the hierarchy is one of the cultural parts of this campaign, it seems to me. Yeah. There was Silke, I think, that asked to talk.
Yeah, just a question on just to pick up the question you just made, if the moment is politically right. I guess I got the impression yesterday that when you look from Italy, the European world looks a little different, because obviously the moment was very right here. And obviously it's no wonder that transition time movement comes from one of the most liberalized and most early liberalized countries in Europe, that the water referendum succeeded here in Italy. In Germany, it's like you start a discussion in the Commons, and it happens always the same thing. You spend the whole time discussions what the hell the Commons is. It's like a little what we did yesterday, right? So my concern is the moment right to get the message through, because we talk about mobilization. And mobilization implies huge masses. And is there an infrastructure we can use? So last week I really got a new push of energy, because in Germany on Monday there were the most important climate scientists of Germany, probably the next Nobel Prize winners within 10 years or 20 years, saying, so today they opened the conference in Durban and we are sitting here and we found the MacArthur Research Institute of Global Commons and Climate Change, because that is what has to be done. We can only tackle the climate issue if we rely on, if we go back to the concept of the commons and reframe the whole discussion. So this was really like amazing. That means the most important climate scientists in Germany say we cannot engage anymore, waste our time anymore in the ongoing binary negotiation process, and we have to reframe the whole discussion. So what I want to say is perhaps we should look for, in order to define if the political moment is right, look for some really huge allies beyond Italy. Or maybe the IUC and your mobilization capacity is enough to do something alike in Europe. I'm not sure. At least our group is a kind of 3 guys, you know, working at their own. So another thing, sit down and talk with the guys from Avaz.
From where?
Avaz, the Avaz network. This is the only technical process I can ever imagine to get this thing done. And they can do it country by country, so they can do really a huge campaign to get the word spread, and they're great in doing so, and reducing something really complex into a small letter to make people sign a petition. So that's the greatest organization doing this. So I guess I would suggest to, before even I commit to such a long-term process, as I said, we're just 3 guys, is the moment right? I would like to listen to some answers. I understood that the moment is right because there are elections in the official agenda. Is the moment right culturally, politically, in thinking?
I mean, it's a way to see how do you know if it's right if you don't try it.
Yeah.
It's so sad to be scared of these things. Let's start doing it if we can, and we see what kind of energy we mobilize. I really think that, you know, no, I mean, there are instruments. Look, there would not have been the water referendum in Italy if some crazy guy would have not said, we draft the questionnaire, we do it. Because you see, the old water people, the organized forum, they didn't want to do it at the beginning. They were scared, maybe we don't get the signature, what if we lose, we should do this, we should do that. But the law, you know, allows one person to do it. That's a fantastic thing of the law. You put the thing there and it starts, and then it's easy.
And that's a dilemma, of course.
Yeah,
of course. We have to try to find out if it was right. I'm sure. But I also suggest let us look for some smart alliances.
Yeah, sure. That's what we're nicely entering the second part of the discussion.
You must always leave the door open for positive, unforeseen events. Look, for example, the referendum.
It was one just because of the explosion in Japan.
The nuclear referendum. We had Fukushima.
Yeah, and you know, because of prudence and because of this kind of strategizing, we all were included against the fact that the nuclear referendum had been on the ballot. Because we said people is sick about the nuclear issue, you know, let's keep it off the ballot, let's focus on water, and we battled against the nuclear referendum. And then thanks God there was the nuclear referendum, otherwise we would not have won even on the water. So, I mean, it's just a part of the, you know, egocentric idea that you can control the political happenings and what the world is going to look about. I mean, let's focus on what we're doing and do it, because there are the conditions to do it, and see to do it as best as we can, knowing that there's going to be so many unforeseeable circumstances from now to 2000 and whatever, when it's, even from now and April, you know, the world might be different. So it seems to me that that thinking about future generation doesn't think about controlling how things might be in 30 years from now, which is, you know, just the. I would be much more keen into putting everybody of us puts his or her own resources and energy. If they believe in the project, if they don't, there's going to be someone else that does, and let's go move forward. Go ahead.
Yes, I just reacting on to this. Is the moment right? I think the moment is very right. There are millions of people protesting on the streets throughout Europe for what essentially is a disenfranchisement of common goods. Is it easy to articulate this moment into a European political process that takes the banner of the commons? Absolutely not. It is extremely complex from a political and from an organizational aspect. Is it possible? Yes. But I think we need to be very clear of the magnitude of the work that's required, and especially we need to be very clear of the challenge that it is to transform that which is an Italian perception of the logic of common goods into a European movement. In Italy, we have a very privileged situation because 27 million people have voted for something that had the name common goods. And there is an immediate translation of this concept with a clear political practice and a set of reivindications. This is not the case in Europe. What for me needs to happen is to build a capacity to articulate, for example, the movements against the privatization of the post office in the United Kingdom, or the movements against the rising tuition fees in the United Kingdom, or the moves against the privatization of the NHS in the United Kingdom, and to articulate that articulate a response to that, which has the commons in it. To articulate the movement in Spain for a democratization of political process and local governments in a response that presents the commons as a response to that problem. To articulate in Germany, the Para Party had 10% in Berlin, partly also campaigning on questions of technological commons. It is not so explicit, that needs to be made explicit. Germany has done with nuclear power. That is something that also relates directly to the commons. In Romania, there is the largest Romanian civil society mobilization of post-communist era on something that is very clearly related to the commons. It's the use of land. But all of this is an extremely difficult political process. One needs to do two things. One is to build the contacts with at least some of the principal actors of these movements, which are active throughout Europe. You need to work with them to try and understand how do we decline our response to the problems that you feel in Madrid, and you feel in London, and you feel in Rosa Montana or Cluj-Napoca, in a way that presents the commons as a response. And then go back to those countries and begin to initiate the kind of process that has taken place in Italy over the last years that explains why the commons is a response, and explains why and how the commons can be articulated as a response. So this is for me the most urgent process actually that needs to be started now. It can be extremely complicated, but it can also be extremely simple to begin this process. It's a question of calling an appointment which gathers some of these subjectivities from 4, 5, 6 European member states, preparing this meeting with them beforehand, talking extensively on the telephone with those that we invite, to try and come up already before the meeting with some sense, some shared understanding of what the commons is and how common goods can represent a response to what goes on in Madrid as well as in Bucharest. And then at this meeting, trying to build a political discourse, a very simplified presentation of the commons in a way that responds to very differentiated European political actuality. And then if this works, then this meeting can be followed up with local level or national meetings in the countries where these organizations come from, as an attempt to broaden out the discourse. I mean, we need to build also sort of local and national coordination. We can speak about, I mean, this is on getting the organization, and we can speak about this later on.
No, let's do that.
For me, this is,
I think this is exactly what I mean, organizationally, you know, the forms required to do this, as you know very well, is to create a committee representing a certain number of member states in this committee. Then each, I think it's 7 or 9, I don't remember, it's 7. So it's a committee of 7. But then the signatures have to be collected in 9 states, right?
1/3.
Yeah, 1/3, which is 9 states. And the number of signatories for each state is quite limited. And this is really something that is actually the number of the European parliamentary members multiplied by 750. So in Italy it would be 54,000. In Italy, England would be 54,000. In Germany it would be about 80,000. Yeah. Anyway, so but the point is that there are some steps that are to be met in order to be ready formally. But I think that there is a thing that makes things even more difficult in a way. But that really goes in the direction you're saying. That is what I think is interesting. You know, you start doing the things and you see what you see how it unfolds. So the first meeting should be about, of course, about going ahead in the discussion of the actual charter and the kind of issues we handle today, but also should have as a target the creation of the committee that actually exists for presenting for pre-registered initiatives, because we can from January 1. We can just file the initiative as something that is out there, and to do that we need the committee in place. So this would be the kind of the next meeting would be the one in which I think we should, after all what you're saying, you know, trying to identify who would be the organizations in the different systems. What are the most important? That is a very good point you put. What are the most important struggles that in each country are felt as symbolic of the commons? Because you see, in Italy, sure, water is what's extremely important. Right now, there is a huge struggle that is kind of local right here in Torino on the fast train, and on this idea of that we can dig a 60 kilometers tunnel with all sorts of disasters in terms of ecology, to save 35 minutes in order to reach from Turin to Paris, which is pretty much the time we spend anyway to check the paper. So it's an absurdity that shows a certain level, a certain model of development, which is anti-commons by definition, you know, this very bottom-up big kind of things developed, and has originated a massive resistance in the area. So there are like thousands and thousands of people that are actively involved with every kind to claim and to protect their commons and the territory. So that is another struggle that in Italy is important. So we can, and we are able to, and here it depends on the network of each one of us, to identify in the different European countries which are the things that are really felt. And we can kind of include show that struggles are unified by the idea of the common. That is the most challenging and interesting cultural contribution we can give in that direction, because then these struggles get connected. They know they can learn from each other. In Italy, it happened actually after the referendum. The different struggles, you know, different occupations, different battles are now talking to each other and strategizing together and learning from each other. If that can happen at the European level, would be whatever would be the result would be already a massive contribution. Yes.
You know,
I
think you should have as well look at those movements that are, for instance, transforming the citizens in co-producers. And it,
the gas.
Yeah, the gas. And in France, for instance, this AMAC movement is extremely important because it's the reorganization of consumers to protect a producer, and all the relationship has changed, and we are building a common good. And there are hundreds of thousands of people in France involved in this AMAC movement, and there is. Yeah, they are invisible as a movement, but they exist.
Yes.
And all of what, it's not only, protecting what exists and should be preserved, it's the idea of co-producing common goods as well. And I think that part of the perspective should be to be involved in co-producing common goods. And I think I'm sure that all these gas maps there are in Europe, in Belgium, in England, in Germany. So all these people who is coming to an agreement to preserve, the movement to preserve the seeds, traditional seeds in France is extremely important, and they are being persecuted by the state because they are given for free non-certified seeds. These people as well is interesting. So I think we should explore with a larger view of those who are producing common goods as well.
Yes. Yes, I think that's very important.
There's one just a brief consideration that in this moment we have a new stage of the global financial crisis involving not just the crisis of public debt of single national sovereign state, but a wider public debt crisis in the Eurozone. That means that the most important form of European Union, the monetary union, the currency union, we knew in the last years is at risk. And in this moment of deepest crisis of the European construction, of the European building as we know in the past, there is a large demand from the movement, single issues, movements like larger, broader social and political movements to grasp a new political dimension of Europe. I think that if from below there is a claim of a new season of social justice, a claim of a new season of revenue redistribution, wealth redistribution, the political space of Europe is the right dimension in which this demand, this claim can be supported and developed. So I think that the political importance of these European citizen initiatives is that offer the process, offers the way in which we can give to different social and political movements all over Europe, single issues or more broader, the way in which the idea of a political Europe built from below can be reached. So this is, I think, one of the reasons why don't be afraid about the strengthness of this proposal, about the possibility of delve larger and larger from the people which are here today.
Filippo?
No, just one consideration. We should probably also not forget that mainstream social democratic parties are nowadays in Europe in a deep crisis, which is basically, perhaps I'm speaking again
very much from a Swedish perspective, I don't know. But I'm also very optimistic, as I said yesterday. There are a deep crisis, which is an identity crisis. And as I see it, they are very much looking for a new battle, because that will allow them to reconnect to their former voters. And I think that the common battles could be if we use our connection with those parties. I think, for instance, the Swedish Social Democratic Party, arguably the most successful social democratic party in Europe, which is now in a very deep crisis because it over-liberalized itself. It gets so much to the center that it's not really recognizable. And what I see in that party today is a sort of desperate search for something to fight about. Perhaps I stress it too much, but I think that's what's happening. And I think that if we give them something to fight about, I perceive this sort of my distress.
I know there is the crisis when they're looking for something to fight about. At least from Italy, it's exactly what they are not looking for. They're looking for they're looking for ways to establish whatever they
but they're looking for a cause. They're looking for a cause, you know. They're looking for something that gives them an identity vis-a-vis instead the ordinary, moderate, liberal party which is governing the country at the moment. And I think this is true for many other countries as well. So this could be a way of giving them that sort of cause to fight about. Again, it may be a too optimistic view of the subject, but
maybe there are different dynamics in different European countries also from this point of view, but yeah. So, but it's of course, if we can connect whatever, if we have an organizational phase, of course we have to guess that who would be the more mobilizing, more significant individuals that we can get involved to begin with. Yes.
Just one point to add, because I think it's an interesting thought, and also because we have to think of trying to find alliances also in the European Parliament already now. I think there are people there attentive to this, and they will not change all after the election of 2014, and especially not their assistants will change. We're doing the job most probably. So I think alliances in the European Parliament are a key issue, but we also could try to find alliances in the European Commission. There are a lot of people, interesting people, and I'm quite sure if we find one or two important persons there really attentive to this issue, it would be a very important step forward. I just mentioned again this civil code, European civil code example. This comes really from a scholars initiatives years ago. And they found one single functionary in the European Commission attentive to this idea, and he was a head of unit in
that's completely coherent with the neoliberal order, so that's easy. I mean, if you want to fight a battle and win it, if you're telling to these people it's going in your interest, I'm going to win and become the president, not the problem. The problem is to do things that they don't like, whereas the European Civil Code has been so much denaturalized. And it became so much like a little kind of soft idea to give on the ego of some proponent that, I mean, it seems to me that if that is the example, I would rather stay out of it, quite frankly. I don't know if, Horatia, you have a different sense.
Yeah, I'm afraid I would agree.
No, I agree on this, but, well, anyway.
Yeah.
It's just, I think that although important to find some alliances.
Yeah, no,
that's the point that I would like to make, and I think it could be done.
Okay, Silke?
Yeah, just to wrap up, because I opened the debate, and I was so surprised by your reaction, because I just asked you to get into a discussion if the moment is right, and then you did it, but after a strong reaction that I would like to control everything. I don't know why, but everything what has been said here has been basically my not even analysis, but intuition. What we are doing, what I've done for the last 5 years is bring those movements together, talk to the pirates, tell them that it's not in the program, but they are a common space party. We have to translate the idea of the commons to make it visible, to popularize it. That's what we are doing, and I'm not scared at all in doing this, because that's what I'm doing the whole day without any situation. And I agree with you. that we have just to go for it. The only thing I ask is, where are the smart instruments to leverage it? And again, 2 concrete proposals. We have to contact those guys who just founded the Institute on the Global Commons in Germany, because Germany is a major player in this. And we need a strong organization in Germany to support us in the committee and wherever. And second, try to use the digital commons to make it. Avats or the pirates.
But you have to re-educate the Germans.
What?
You have to re-educate
Oh, don't worry,
the Germans. You see, even in the UK, which is the most progressive in the political framework, they cannot come out on the issue of the debt in a very clear manner.
You get me to one.
So that's what you have. You have to convince the Germans, re-educate the Germans, that re-educate, complete re-education, whereby the financial issue of the debt is a non-issue.
But I guess there was a better way. It's not via the Linkers, it's via the Conservatives. Because there is a crisis of social democracy in Germany as well, but there is even a deeper crisis in conservatism.
But Germany does not.
Anyway, let's go back to our agenda. I think. Let's go back to our agenda and see whether we can outline a roadmap or something like that. Yes. Okay, Saki, you go ahead.
Okay.
Actually, you take the floor. You take the chair.
Okay, I will take the chair. I will take the floor for a second. So, I think that what we're realizing is that, okay, we started with, do we fight this on 2 fronts? Do we go for the charter that we actually think will succeed, which will take a lot of compromise on the issue of the commons, the focus on a single issue, basically just, trying to fit it squarely within the paradigm of neoliberalism, of the national laws, of the European directives, European regulation. Do we do that? Or we're saying, okay, or do we put something there that's going to fail? Or do we do both, okay? I think that we should stick with what we really believe in. Maybe this is idealistic now, but instead of the compromise of finding some single issue that might make its way through the European system and then get diluted and turn into something else. And I mean, this is not the point, right? The point is, I think we're saying, let's fail. Let's create something we believe in. Let's fail, and let's not just fight it through courts, but let's fight it through creating an alternative referendum. Why don't we use the same ECI and say, and be critical about the European Commission as the medium, the filter between the people and the European system? Why are they the medium? And to some extent, it's not their fault, right? I mean, we don't need to create an enemy. To some extent, it's because nation states won't give them the authority to create a political Europe, right? And what we're talking about is a political Europe. One, to say, economic processes are controlling us. We need a political system to counter that. We are an economic union. We need a political union. Let's create the alternative referendum. Let's mobilize people, get the signatures, because it's only through the pressure from the bottom up, and this is what the commons is, right? It's not a directive down from Brussels, it's from the bottom up. It's only through pressure through the bottom up that you actually create pressure on national governments to then actually try to create a real political Europe that might embrace something, a huge paradigm shift like this one. And so I think we should go with that. Let's focus ourselves and let's look at what we have in front of us to see if this is something that represents the views of yesterday, right? Does it use the language of the activists that we're saying we want to mobilize? This is critical. Is it using the language of the politicians within these various nation states? I mean, let's focus, right? We're not in the theoretical debate anymore. Let's go with the project. And I think we have the project.
Lorenzo.
Yes, just to follow up on this point, actually, and also perhaps you can present a draft of a roadmap so that we can discuss it as well. Before, just a parenthesis, something that has not been said today or yesterday, well, two things. One is just a point of information that we should keep in mind, that the Citizens Initiative on Public Water that will be discussed in April 2010 has actually been approved by 20 European trade unions, part of the European Trade Union Congress. So that is the most promising European Citizens Initiative for the moment. It boasts the support of 20 trade unions, who obviously can mobilize a significant number of people. At some point, we may want to talk about how to relate to that and who from this table is going to make it. Second point of information is that, as you know, we're now talking about the Citizens Initiative. As you know, everyone is talking about treaty change, and it's a few weeks that everyone is talking about treaty change. This most likely will take the form of an intergovernmental treaty change. A lot of MEPs, yesterday Andrew Duff, are calling for a convention to be called. And as you know, the convention is the closest to a constitutional assembly that the European Union has. It may be that we could also try and play a role to strengthen the voices of those calling for a European convention. And as you know, European conventions are the places where constitutional changes can be demanded. The European Charter of Fundamental Rights comes from that process. And so let's also keep in mind that there is this constitutional space, and it's something that's extremely relevant these weeks and will be relevant increasingly in the coming months. Keep in mind, something to keep in mind. When it comes down to the roadmap, well, my suggestion is that we organize a European meeting that's a work meeting inviting activist networks, organizations, NGOs, social movements from, doesn't have to be 7 countries to begin with, it can be 5 or 6 European states. Then we do that relatively soon, I'd suggest the end of January. That we work between now and then with those organizations that we plan to invite, and we can socialize the contacts we have and map them out. We work with them to try and clarify what we mean by a campaign on the commons that responds to the prerogatives of different national situations. Perhaps this can be done actually in a common way, so something like a wiki, but we need to be able to give clear answers to the questions that I'm asked every time when I speak about this in England or in Romania. So what do you mean by commons, what kind of political things, and we need simple answers to that. If we initiate this process, in January we can meet with these organizations. I say January because our organization could then contribute some finance as well. So end of January, beginning of February. We meet with them, we see there if we can have a common standpoint on this. If, as I think that is possible, we can organize by the end of March national meetings in all the countries that have come to this first European meeting, travel to those meetings, organize those meetings, and make sure that in London, in Barcelona, in Paris, in Bucharest, in Sofia, in Berlin, in Prague, a couple of other cities perhaps, there are meetings about the commons and a European campaign for the commons before the end of March. That sounds like something that's really difficult, but it's actually not. I mean, that's what our organization does all the time. So it is possible. It is complicated, it is expensive, it does take a lot of time, but I think we can do it. And then we see, I mean, I think it's important to also be a little bit humble and sort of keep, not already commit too much that before we're certain that we can actually deliver it. Because as you know, with political processes, it's important to keep your a sense of well, both humility and also seriousness. So it's good that we don't over-commit ourselves.
Yeah, just one point that is important to sign up is not that this thing is unrelated, it is a different thing than the Naples thing of next week. This is exactly the same umbrella. The charter, the water thing was started by Mr. De Magistris and Lucarelli, so our own guy is there. Here, I mean, it's the same thing. So this is a kind of a preparatory broadening up structure and platform in order to try to arrive to the meeting in next week, not having it taken over by kind of some sort of narrow integralism of water people. So it's already the same. It's already the same platform, and so and it's basically the platform that is going on next week is also has as an origin the liberation of the municipality of Naples that is giving origin to this meeting today. So So it's really a quite similar process. The point is that we have actually to find, it cannot be the process of only of the European Trade Union of the public workers, right? Because it has to be a richer structure, it has to be much more plural, and so this is part of kind of pluralizing it, and that's I think it was a very important contribution that you just gave, and that we discussed here. You know, there are a variety of different sensitivities in the different systems of Europe, and there is a different roles of the trade union in the different points of Europe. So it's already part of the same platform. So it seems to me that we have to actually, if anything, the one next week in Naples is just a little bit more Italian-centric, you know, because it's still very much the sort of Italian water movement through Mr. Oldi and this kind of guys that have involved some others, you know. So it's still very much part of the follow-up of Italian water, and there is a very clear idea in Lucarelli to keep it, to open it up as much as possible to the variety of approaches. Yeah.
In Italy and abroad too, obviously. And I think that next Saturday could represent a good opportunity, no, to launch this kind of initiative in Italian level, no? And then to open the initiative naturally to the European one, also because we are talking about a European initiative. And to be more practical, but schematic, more than practical, no? And to respect also the steps that you have fixed at the beginning of this discussion, no? About the legal issues, the point A, no? The ideal point A. I think that the idea of commons must or has be linked to the service of general interest, because we have also always to think that we have to implement the treaties, ex Article 2 of regulation. And so if you ask me where you can find a link into the treaties to the idea of commons, because we have to describe exactly which are commons in a legal point of view. I personally, and modestly too, think just to the service of general interest, for the strict link between service and goods, and also for the idea of social and territorial cohesion. But and naturally, this idea is always respectful of the interests of future generations, like the Commission Rodotà, of which Professor Mattei was the animator, the principal animator, as already established in 2007, no? Because the concept of the commons at that time described into the Commission Rodotà for the reform of the civil code Italian was about also the respect of the future generation, no? And in an ecological way. The legal act, I am completely open to your suggestion, because at the beginning of this day I was more sure to think about a regulation for its nature self-executing, no? And also because we are talking about commons, and I was thinking that the regulation is the most common, the most harmonic way, no? To insert an idea in the same way in all the European legal space. But if you are talking about directive, I am naturally agree, no? And a roadmap, we have, I think, time until March 2012, in which the European institutions could decide which will be the institution for each country responsible to manage this process. And so I think that before maximum next March we have to present a paper will be more definitive as possible, no?
Gilda? Please.
I think you should be careful with the services of general interest. And I think it deserves a bit more of, you know, thoughts and exchange on that. because most of them are private or in the road to be privatized. And I think all this idea of social innovation that has been launched by the Commission looks at the, of course, service of general interest by reducing the costs. And this is the major idea that is behind this project of being an innovative Europe in the new 2020 strategy. So I think this is not the idea of the commons, that should be accessible not by sacrificing those who work, not sacrificing the costs, and this is mainly salaries. So I think the idea of commons involves a completely different perspective on the efficiency. So you should be careful. This is, I think, dealing with the commons, and this is exactly what this document is not dealing with, we need a completely different understanding of efficiency. And this is a problem with the service of general interest. How to make accessible to everybody means reducing the costs. The simple problem that you have in the charter is that you never tackle the issue of the prioritization. Where are the priorities for the society in terms of investments? And I think it's a key point. And it's not, and this is as well an issue related to the services of general interest. If this is a priority in terms of investments, it should be done by the private. This is behind all this idea of being smart in the future. And it doesn't involve any idea of transformation, because I think that the idea of commons involves, the sense of transformation. We need them to transform the society, to change the paradigm. And the service of general interest doesn't involve any idea of transformation. That is, for me, it's key. And then the fourth aspect that it is important looking from the commons is the idea of solving the issue of interdependency, because interdependency either will develop in a war, because we discover all the differences and all the fears we have of being interdependent and feeling the impact of others' decisions. Either we solve it with a positive way of working on the issue of interdependence. And these four aspects that for me are keys in terms of addressing the commons. I think it is extremely difficult to address those using the frame of the service of general interest. And I know you want to enter into the perspective of the Commission, the frame that is provided, and but I think it is important before taking that decision to explore, different ways and maybe different perspectives.
To improve the comments.
I suggest, if I can intervene now, I suggest that we keep a dual kind of platform. One is how to move next in the enlargement and in the de-Italianization of the platform, okay? And in a period of time that is relatively short, and how we can involve from the different systems the most significant personalities and organizations that can actually work, being on the side we believe in, so without a sort of compromising in this early phase, okay, of any kind. And that it seems to me that Lorenzo is well equipped to kind of put some thoughts, maybe write a little document at the end of this and circulate among us with his suggestions about a roadmap, and whoever else is actually into the business of activism and organization. This is not stuff that it's not my job, but whoever has ideas on that, I think should kind of come up with that. And are you going to Naples next week, Lorenzo?
I think so.
Okay, so and then in Naples, I mean, we will talk with Alberto, and there is going to be that part going on, which has as a task to identify the most interesting people and groups to carry on then the work with, and that's one thing. Then there is the other thing about the document itself, which is so to say the intellectual construction around which we hope to be able to produce mobilization, and that requires certainly more research and work in terms of legal basis and all that kind of stuff, and that is something that maybe we can do here in Torino with your group or something, or with other international law scholars, and we'll see whoever is, Horatia, for example, certainly has some ideas and some good international law people around her that might be put at work. Yeah, so that would be another part. Maybe some of the IUC students, you know, we decide that is, and then there is the way in which we actually want the document draft. So the way in which we think it's possible to address a charter of the common that is a major improvement of that draft that I just put down to have something to, you know, to see openly and clearly on which side we are and where we stay in terms of, you know, the understanding.
But maybe you can open the debate on this and see who has ideas on this document. It should be interesting.
Absolutely. So that's what I was in my way to do. So so that's basically, it seems to me that there are three different things. You know, the one is the document. Then a document can only be, maybe it can become not the actual. I'm not even sure if you can actually propose a really articulated document, because what I've seen so far in the initiative, you only have kind of outlined the areas. So it's not, so there is space for exercising a good creativity in a document that is both a manifesto and a legal instrument of some original form to put there, and then to worry about how to go through the process. And you know, I especially think that what Saki is saying is interesting. If after 100,000 signatures they say no, we can just go ahead and have our own organization and referendum happening anyway, you know. And if we aim at anyway to have like signatures, then we can develop our own software to certify the signatures, and you know, or we can go ahead and use it anyway. So we can force the process, you know, while suing or while doing. So that is again is something down the pipeline, so maybe let's why don't we open the discussion a little bit for the last time, for the last part on what we have here and what is missing and what you think.
Okay. May I add something on the roadmap? Or?
Yeah, sure. Add something on the roadmap. Sure, please.
I guess the last week of January for the European meeting is perhaps not the best one, at least not for me, because it's the World Social Forum. And at the World Social Forum, we put the issue on the Commons as one of the 4 major issues. And this brings me to another thing. I think Rio + 20 as the next big occasion. We should come up with a proposal on the Commons, probably linked to Rio + 20, because this will be the next failure of the official negotiation, right? And everybody will so if you link it to that, they have some opportunity to get it really in all the newspapers. And that is what the World Social Forum is doing. The World Social Forum wants to do, like right now, the thematic forums last week of January in Porto Alegre, preparing for Rio + 20, and Commons will be one of the major issues. And it just asked me to bring the new movements, to link them to the more traditional social movements involved with the World Social Forum there. So I would be pleased to discuss this with you perhaps. In Germany, there is another occasion. There's a huge mobilization congress on April 20, 21, 22.
What congress?
Huge mobilization. It's usually done by the more classical environmental organizations and issues, and this time they put the Commons on the agenda. And we have the opportunity, it will be our book launch as well, or we'll try to. So it will be really an occasion to popularize the issue and come up with action, because it's a Congress for Action. It's about 1,200, 1,300 people, so we should surely have something there. And again, it's press coverage and a lot of attention. As far as the organizations in different countries are concerned, why didn't we just circulate a paper and just start putting it on the paper? Or you open so whatever you want. But we can do it later on by internet, we can do it, but no, just, of course, but I think you just should not waste time. If your first call could go to everybody, not only to us. So I can give you a number of people I would love them to be here right now. And I could give you a number of names I would love them to get this call tomorrow, and not within 3 weeks.
That's what maybe can work with Saki or something like that. It's a very open way, and the three of you can do it. That's fine. So why don't we talk a little bit about the document? Is there any thoughts about that?
I just have,
John.
This sounds like, so the comments like going to take the place of human rights, something much more progressive it seems, but like, so in the document, do you think it's possible to wonder if the social movements and all those groups, when that meeting happened, that generated a general comment statement that would get put into the newspapers? So we know there's a work product out of April or May, where tons of people are going to sign on, and there's an actual sort of idea of the charter coming out and testing that and getting publicity. And from that would separate from the actual document written for the citizenship initiative, right? Citizens initiative. And we would bring in people who are amenable to that, but it would keep it separate as what it's doing on some level. I don't know, just to sort of capture the, the spirit versus the actual pragmatic. I don't know if that's
Should we go? Like point by point? I mean, and does everybody have a copy of this? There are more copies if anybody needs it, and maybe we can just go through some of it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I would really rather have you chair this, because I did the drafting and not to get in a defensive mood. So no, I mean it's just a matter of putting the right perspective.
Can I just? I'm sure everyone knows. Is the first occasion and the only one that I know in international law. There's been an exercise, let's say, of definition in legal terms of something that we can maybe call commons. And it has been done twice, and it's the definition of the common heritage of mankind. The same things, I'm sure it's not, but there's something that is useful. So I would like to read it to you so that you know in legal terms what has been done to something that is not the same, but the most similar in legal terms things that has to do with commons, even if I'm sure it's not. It's very precise because it says what can not be done to something that is considered common. And it has been done twice. The first time is on the UN Convention on the Law of Sea, and it refers to the seabed. And the second time has been done by the UNESCO for the cultural commons. And it says the area, and the area is the seabed, and its resources are the common heritage of mankind. Okay. No state shall claim or exercise sovereignty or sovereignty rights over any part of the area or its resources, nor shall any state or natural or juridical person appropriate any part thereof. No such claim or exercise of sovereignty or sovereign rights, no such appropriation shall be recognized. All rights in the resources of the area are vested in mankind as a whole, on whose behalf the authority shall act. They have instituted an authority that now they wanted to institute an authority. All of this is on the chart. Nothing has been done in effect, but it was a good idea. These resources are not subject to alienation. They are not property. Okay? The minerals recovered from the area, however, may only be alienated in accordance with this part and the rules, regulations, and procedures of the authority. No state or natural or juridical person shall claim, acquire, or exercise rights with respect to the minerals recovered from the area, except in accordance with this part. Otherwise, not such claim, acquisition, or exercise of such rights shall be recognized. The general conduct of states in relation to the area shall be in accordance with the provision, etc., the principle, etc., etc., and other in the cause, etc. State parties shall have the responsibility to ensure the activities in the area, etc. The thing is that whatever the authority should have done on this area was something, even if there was some profit, that had to be redistributed equally between the world humanity. So this is the first time, I think,
when was that drafted?
In legal terms, 1973. The first time that law tried to define something common, which is not
point of legal civilization worldwide.
So I think, that in terms of Antarctica e anche la Luna, also for the moon, it's for the moon, for the seabed, and
it's a bit easier for the moon.
Yeah, but UNESCO has made the same thing for the common cultural heritage of mankind. So the law has already tried to. So, and it's very important that it says that it's not property. It's of no one. I think that we have to make a reference. It's not the first time that we try to define.
Also, it seems to me that there is something to be learned from the recent constitutions of Ecuador and Bolivia and stuff like that. In trying, because this is still very anthropocentric. Whereas, the commons should really not be anthropocentric.
This is Stabocentric.
Yeah. Well, really humankind, anyway. Mankind, even man, is even gendered in a way that we may not like so much. But, that's because it was reflecting its own time, which was the 70s, and it was, there was a major effort at civilization, but with a different. So I think that putting at the center nature as such, as is done so putting at the center the ecological community or something like that, it might be a good strategy, because otherwise the only immortal structures we have are the corporations, you see, because the corporations are the only legal subjectivities that never die, and they always grow. And this is why now they are bigger and stronger than states, because over time they have been accumulating with no limit. And we as individuals are, we die at some point. We're mortal, whereas granting legal personality to something that is not human is already something that is done, but has been done only for corporations. Right now is the moment of granting legal personality, and that would be really something that should be considered as something important. Granting legal personality to something else that is, an aggregating time and space. So it's a community of time, but it's a community in the sense of future generation and all of that. But it's not, but it's not compatible as it is right now with the structure of law. And that could be, also an angle to take. But anyway, yeah. And the second chair. We're talking about the document now. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to react briefly to.
Really briefly, because otherwise we start talking about, if it's really relevant, do it. If not, we don't have much time. Let's go.
Well, I think it's relevant, but I'll try to be extremely brief. I think this suggestion to revisit this idea of common heritage of mankind is very interesting and very relevant. Just to quote, there was another issue on which this proposal was being discussed, and then it didn't work, was right before the Rio conference of '92 about the issue of genetic heritage. Then, of course, the idea that was passed in the Convention of the Biological Diversity was that this is state property, paving the way for privatization and so on. The interesting part is that one of the points on which the Convention on the Biodiversity shocks in its implementation is really the deadlock between this privatization perspective and local common heritage associated to traditional knowledge, which is really one of the unsolvable points of Article 8G and so on. And maybe in Rio Plus 20, these contradictions could be forwarded in a strong way using the idea of the commons. That's why I think also the proposition of getting these non-European future agendas in mind is very relevant and interesting.
I forgot my notes. I already made notes. But in general, I liked it very much. Somebody yesterday said it's perhaps a language people are not used to read. I'm very used to read this kind of language. I felt it very natural. But there's still something like the duopoly, the binary distinction, private-public, in some of the articles. So that should be carefully rewritten. Just an example, paragraph 2. Unaccountable corporate sector over public institutions. It feels like, oh, the public institutions are the good ones and the corporate sectors are the bad ones. And whereas, and that should be carefully rewritten or reframed as well, enclosure, which is more than privatization. I would not conflate never enclosure and privatization in one word. I would put the notion of enclosure forward. And enclosure comes from both sides, both historically and, as for instance, in the CBD in Dresden. So I would really urge you to decide for one term when we refer to the commons, which is commons. It is not public good for the reasons we argued yesterday. It is not services for what Gilda just said. It is just the commons. And referring to what you just said on, perhaps we should put the notion of nature in the center. I think we should not do that. Because in a certain way, yes, the commons is an anthropocentric approach, but a well-understood anthropocentric approach is better than all what we have right now. If you put nature at the center, my fear is that you, again, disconnect nature, object on one side, and subjects, institutions, persons on the other side. The commons is all about this. There is no separation between nature and people. There's no separation between subject and object. There's no separation between. It's really a reframing. And well, I would review the whole charter, putting enclosure forward, commons forward, and deleting every rest of binary thinking in the whole structure. And the last point, perhaps, is we should not start with the problems. We should start with the opportunities, I guess. For instance, I love the first sentence. We should hold these truths for being self-evident, that our internal, and then put the potential of the commons up front, put it at the very beginning. And then that we can overcome the crisis by reframing our way of thinking and building institutions this way should be a kind of natural result for whoever reads the charter. So the crisis is at the end, the potential of the commons at the beginning. For instance,
so you put number 5 as number 1.
Number 5, number 8, exactly. Number 5, number 8. Yeah, should be at the beginning. 1, 5, 8. I have to reread it because I forgot my notes.
Does it seem like it's divided into 3 sets? So after the beginning, it seems like there's 3 issues that everything organized. One is the issue of environment, one's another sort of finance and economics, right? And another one's immigration or politics and stuff like that. So I almost wonder if we had a general statement And then when we identified the areas, it would be very easy to link everything afterwards. So public services and resources, right, could be one of the proposals after the general theme. Does that make sense? So what are the general things? It seems does that seem right? Like, are we?
So you mean, yeah, that's maybe putting the comments, I'm not sure.
So the comments as a general theme, we make the statement. And then it seems that maybe we set a roadmap very early on in the directions we're speaking of. So there seems to be an economic crisis going on, there seems to be an immigration political crisis, identity going on, and there seems to be a financial, an environmental one. It's unsustainable, and we all kind of know that. So if we set down that instability and we identify the different areas, from that it would be very easy then to say, on the context of environment now, you know, after they move past number 3 or 4, here's what we think are most essential. You know, here on economics, we want to think of public services and, you know, but keep it open, but start off with those general.
I think, you know, it's a bit defensive. Finally, we don't understand what for. I think at the beginning we should have the vision, because this is what is lacking at the moment, you know, a vision to be shared. And the first part should be the vision. And the comments then, you know, as an answer to this vision, otherwise it's extremely defensive and, okay, we will be, you know, protecting ourselves from the corporates and from the state, but there is no why we want these commons to be at the center of the political scene. And this, for me, should be the first part. Then we need even an ambiguous definition, but something that, you know, help the people understanding what the common is. And then I think this charter lacks any idea of processes, any idea of how to reach, you know, a wider understanding of commons, how citizens could, you know, arrive at being part of a process of protecting, creating, developing, and why. The role of future generations in this, because I think fear for the future generation is something that at least those who are parents are sharing. This is the only thing that I'm sure we are sharing in Europe. It's fear for the future generations. Everywhere there is fear. So maybe, you know, explore what is already being shared as the common risk for the society. And I think you ignore, but I'm repeating myself by using the concept of we the people, or we the citizens. You ignore the differential of power. And this is something that, you know, you should tackle this, otherwise it's not realistic. Yeah. And contradictory interests are only, not only, you know, with the corporations. And the problem is that because you are calling the people as a large entity, you don't work on the idea of shared responsibilities. And I think it's because we are working on that. This is not the reason. But recently I was in New York and President Clinton addressed this group of people gathering. And he said that we are in an era of shared responsibilities. And I think the concept is good because
that's a good reason not to use it. Very good reason. Very good reason. This is what this stuff is against, you know. People like Clinton introducing, you know, hijacking ideas like the commons, sustainability, all that kind of stuff. No, on this one, you know, I really think
you are in a war that maybe I am not.
Maybe we can
go as well trying to understand where are the alliances for the things. And,
no, thank you. No President Clinton, please.
Let's go back a little bit.
No, but this is a concept that we are using the concept of Europe. I'm just saying that it is something that maybe sometimes is appealing as.
Anyway, Gilda, the point is that when Hugo proposed the water reform, no alliances in the old political system were searched for, okay? And the thing worked. So possibly that will.
Yeah, but it worked as a referendum, but now you have the municipalities who are going to privatize these companies, okay? You don't have any popular processes to appropriate the use and the distribution of water. There is no cooperatives. There is nothing, for the future. So we otherwise we are debating ideology.
Yeah, the problem.
We're debating ideology.
No, it's okay.
I just want to say one thing. I think this point about the processes, the procedure is extremely important. And when Hugo and I had a conversation about the writing of this, I really said this can't turn into a human rights document where you have Article 1, Article 2, the right to this, the right to that. It has to be procedural because the Commons is about governance, right? And the difficulty of articulating general procedures is that the procedures to some extent are resource bound, community bound, these kinds of things. But I still think we ought to put something in here that is more along those lines, in the sense that to point at some of the things like you're saying. I mean, the legal forms, for example, that do create procedures. The foundation. I mean, for example, I spent some days at the Teatro Valle, where Hugo wrote a very innovative legal statute which protected the occupation in view of becoming a foundation. So in the interim, it protected the occupants from being invaded by the police, okay? These are things, these kinds of procedures, right? So legal forms, the trust, the foundation, the cooperative, these kinds of things I think should be there because they are connected to the procedure, right? For somehow protecting people in the process of reclaiming, right? So I wanted to highlight this point. We have two people, we have Giancarlo and we have Luigi.
Well, two little things just to me. First, I agree with Hugo that we must be careful with the rhetoric of shared responsibility, because I believe it is part of the neoliberal restructuring of the state, trying to discipline everybody to act as if the state could not do. The retreat of the state is also a strategy to make the burden of responsibility on the citizens. So I agree with the vision of being careful with this rhetoric. And the second point is very specific, and it refers to the charter. I will try to stress much more point 28, which is quite at the end of the charter, because I would stress much more this issue that commons are transformative, and since commons are transformative, the same is society. And I will try to use the charter also to put a vision that society in Europe is dynamic, and in a certain way I will try to put a strategy to break the fortress that Europe has become. I mean, Europe is something which must be inclusive of other people. So I would use this kind of article to stress that commons are transformative as society is. So I will try to include also those who are not European today, because they will be. This is my details. Yes. So I will stress much more that point.
And also, in that case, we the people of Europe. I mean, this is also, right? I mean, I think we all kind of agree somehow this isn't the right way.
Yeah, let's take it back.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, I mean, because it has that problem as well that you're saying with the exclusion. I think it's true. I mean, Nilda said, the point should be that we bring forth the vision of the commons much earlier on in this document. And there are several points, I think, that bring it together. One is number 4, right, where we talk about for the full-fledged development of the human person, right? And this is the language of the Roman Declaration.
Yeah.
I think it's a very anthropocentric term here, person. Maybe being, human being could be better. It's even a Christian sort of anthropology.
The person?
Personality. Even though maybe you are using that in a...
No, the person, you should do something. You never read, do you read stuff on personality in law?
Yeah, no,
person is a very thick concept and is actually all but it really tries to go beyond the idea of subject and to include values that are way beyond that. I mean, it has a specific legal meaning that I still share today, so I don't think it's either anthropocentric or Christian.
Okay, but I see the risk, and you know, actually, I took the liberty of inserting in article in the number 20 that it says they must be preserved for equal access by future generations within a model of intergenerational justice that is indispensable as a direct contribution of the people of Europe to the ecological survival of humankind on this planet. I added this: the Commons requires a redefinition of the human relationship to nature, to see ourselves as part of nature and not merely as owners and consumers. So I think I think that has to be there, because that is some part of the understanding of the redefinition of our relationship to the environment and for future generations, that we're not just thinking of individuals, right? As our individual interests, we're looking for the future, we're looking at the environment. So I think I would propose bringing that up earlier as well as part of the vision of the Commons. I think it can be both. I mean, anyway, this is going to turn into a document of everything to some extent. Like
no, if we put everything first, then something goes after. You know? There's a physical limit in what we can put first.
I have another observation on paragraph 4.
No, but, yeah.
I'm going to bring it to Luigi, who is patiently waiting.
Oh, I just wanted to say, it's sort of a terminological thing, but on Article 15, there is like sort of a reference to like a social and ecological catastrophe, and I thought maybe catastrophism tends to sort of sometimes alienate people because it sort of stimulates their fear as the driver for getting to the commons, rather than maybe what Silke was suggesting, to put forward, you know, the potential of the commons. I think just sort of as a tactical thing.
It always works better.
I would agree with that, but I also sort of like the idea, and John brought it up earlier, about framing the problem. So there's also that. I mean, in a way, you can start with a vision, or you can start with the problem, and then the vision being the answer to some extent. There is that kind of a way of right, reasoning. It's a kind of form of reasoning. I mean, to some extent, I don't think we should totally avoid saying there is a kind of ecological crisis, there is a global financial crisis. I mean, yeah, Silke, response?
Yeah, response. But the very problem is the problem of thinking and the problem of ideas. So I really would suggest to take the million times referenced ecological catastrophe out and to refer to the problem and the crisis of thinking in almost all political ideologies right now. And this refers back to our relationship to nature. I wouldn't stress it that much because I basically think that, as we said yesterday, as property is the common system of social relationship. How we relate to each other in terms of how we regulate access to resources which are not only natural, which are also cultural and social. So, commons as a different social relationship means the very problem is that we always talk about the individual, but it's about linking the individual to the collective interest. So a sentence we want to use is not, where's the sentence of the individual's development? In which paragraph was it again?
It's 2, yeah.
Sorry, just I want to finish this idea. It's 4, exactly. So we have to state in paragraph 4 that it's not about the full-fledged development of the human person.
Of human relationship, it's a substitute.
Yeah, and I will put it this way. It's about, we can only understand, we can only fully fledge our personal development if we allow the others to fully fledge their development as well. Our development is based on the development of others. So there is no, again, separation between the collective interest and the individual interest. And this, for me, is at the very heart of the commons.
Silke, you must stop to say the things I want to say before I can say it. Actually, I wanted to intervene exactly on the same point of paragraph 4. I think the reference to the human person is too much individual. It's common even in human rights treaties and so on. So I think we should refer more to the community, find a more collective dimension to refer to. And also the refer to the development. I would take it out. I would think we need to start referring to other notions, such that of the bien vivir or other things. Let's leave development out because it's a much too abused, overused term in the. I think maybe the reference to the formulation that exists in the Brazilian constitution about the indigenous people's rights is interesting. Which refers to the physical and social cultural reproduction of communities. So, I mean, maybe we could think of something associating the bien vivir to the physical and social cultural reproduction of European communities and peoples, something like that, too, instead of referring to the development to the individual.
I really think that the word community is another very loaded word. Is pre-modern. They will tell us that we are nostalgic and communities are oppressive. Let's not use community. Let's use relationship instead of person. I think it seems to me that is an open concept. Commons is not community. We are already doing a charter of the commons, not a charter of communities. Commons do not have boundaries, communities do, so let's keep communities out of the...
Okay.
Okay, we have a few people here, so I'm going to
yeah.
take a list now. So we've got Filippo, and then we have Lorenzo, and we have
Orazio.
Okay, Maribel, Orazio, I put down the list here. I'm sorry, Miss Costanza in there as well. I'll put you. Okay, so let's go Filippo.
Okay. Just two considerations. The first one, I agree that we probably should stress relationships more in the document. However, I don't agree about de-stressing environmental issues because, I mean, just on personal note here, I was at the airport the other day, I was reading a Swedish newspaper saying that if global temperature rises 6 degrees, we'll all be extinct as a species from the face of the earth. And I was scared shitless by it. And I think that one is we see this as a constitutional moment. I think we should sort of take the opportunity to make a more deep constitutional change. In the sense that I think one big limit of the legal system today is that it is still completely based on individual property. And this is one thing we have addressed. But it is also not good at addressing the main issue, I think, for the human species, which is simply survival of our species on the planet. This is an issue which the legal system is not addressing, if not marginally. So I think that it would be sort of suicidal not to use this opportunity to stress that function of what we are doing. I mean, there is an environmental catastrophe going on. That is the major problem today. All the other problems are sort of marginal, and I think the commons is a good answer to that issue, or is part of the solution, at least. So I don't know why we should exclude that from, for being afraid of scaring people. We should scare people. They should be afraid. There is no reason for them to be comfortable. I am not comfortable. We are dying as a species. That's the reality of today.
Yes.
Okay, we have Lorenzo with the next
That basically is on two articles. When in the article making is a political charter that speaks also, especially perhaps to movements and realities who may not already be part of the discourse of the common, who may not be very well versed on what the commons are, who perhaps, especially outside of Italy, may have no idea actually what the commons are, despite engaging already in practices that need to be articulated as a practice of the common. In the interest of doing that, I think an article such as Article 16 is fundamental. And I understand fully the processual importance of defining the commons, but this is the only article where it says the commons understood not only as forest, water, cultural goods, but also as schools, healthcare, education, etc., etc. This is the one article that people understand. This is where you make connections, this is where you make links with ongoing struggles. Schools, water, forests, etc., etc., etc. So for this article, I have two suggestions. One is that for me, this should be attached or immediately following Article 4. In Article 4, you say that the commons must be rediscovered. Then you need to tell people who do not know what the commons are, what they are. In, of course, simplificatory ways, as Article 16 is, but it's absolutely essential that people understand what this structure is about, what you mean by common. Secondly, I think this article should also be rewarded with the organizations from other European countries that would be engaging, and to try and really make this one of the central articles where we're teaching the commons with ongoing political struggles at a European level. And we need to have that stimulate a kind of sentiment of, yes, I see my struggle in this. And that's to be worked on, but for me this is the place to do it. The last point is actually very quick, is the very last article, Article 30, doesn't make any sense. There is no such thing as a constitutional assembly of the European Parliament, but I think we should and could call for a European Convention, which is the closest thing there is to a constitutional assembly. The convention, of course, needs to be called by the European Council. It's not so easy, but if we want to develop a constitutional moment at an institutional European level, the convention would be the only way of doing it.
That is exactly what the border of what I mean, on this one we have to see. I don't think the Constitutional Convention will be. I mean, the Constitutional Convention is the problem, not the solution. Yeah. So I mean, if we are doing a document that looks forward and sets up the vision, and then we call the Constitutional Convention with Giuliano Amato and East of the law, it's like having Clinton on board. I'm sorry, but politically, I think we should be very clear where we are, and therefore, if we were to make a provocation, which is asking for a constitutional assembly, we say, look, there is a parliament. We recognize the parliament as the only institution in Europe which is legitimized by elections today, which is true, and we recognize that because we are democratic. Let's grant the parliament the role that is belonged to a parliament in a moment of emergency. So it's an emergency move of saying that the world is falling apart. Europe is an important structure of the world. Europe has a place in which the European people can talk. That's the parliament. They will not want to have like the convention of the usual well-known people to decide for us because they goofed it. And so now as people we want to take it over, and this is the constitutional moment. So to me this is like either we ask nothing, or if we ask something, we ask something that we believe in. I don't ask like the constitutional convention.
I'm against the constitutional convention as well, but I think it's better not to ask anything than ask something that's patently absurd to anybody expert in European institutions.
Well, but saying that it's patently absurd to grant the power to the only elected institution to do some, to draft the Charter of the Commons is already something you should question. Why is patently absurd, right? Why is patently absurd? Give me an articulation that is coherent with the notion of rule of law, democracy, of rights of the European treaties, by which it's patently absurd that the only elected body should not have the power to discuss and to vote a charter like this. Give me a coherent reason, because otherwise we assume that it's patently absurd, whatever is not the legal reality that was constructed by corporate power in the last 50 years.
There's no source of power to do that. Sorry.
Okay, well maybe it should be made clear that it's something completely out of the current venues, the formal institutions which are in place at the moment, or something like this, right? Something this is. Just one point, and I moved next to Lorenzo. You said 16 about public services. You made this point as important to defining the common. It says public again, right? And we get back into this public. Are we talking about public? So I would move to strike public. I mean, if we're, I mean, in a way, or you could say currently public. You know, so people, as you said, connect to the issue at home because they see it as what was currently the public bus system, whatever it is. Yes. Yes. Okay, I react.
I think public services, the way these kind of services are identified. So
they are called the public services. Public services bisogna, se no la gente non capisce. We have to use terms that people know that public services are now
Otherwise people
the
don't
public
know what
service.
to
Then
do
they will
about it.
become the commons. But if you don't explain to people what we're talking about, they will never know what commons are. So now we make a document that we understand and no one else understands. If you don't say to people what you are asking that public services becomes
The
something
child,
else.
you can
But
write
now
the
they are
child
called
care, the
public
bus, the school, the thing, you can make it a list and not call it public services. There is a word to call it that, but today, which is reasonably coherent with what we all understand.
Let's table the public debate. Let's table the public debate for a second. Let's table it as in like let's delay it so we can allow the people who are in the line to react to things that were said earlier.
But even so, if I may, or there was somebody else.
No, c'è Lorenzo.
Yeah, there is Lorenzo.
Lorenzo.
I'm Lorenzo Coppoli from Rome. And my point is just about the term community, which occurs at point 14 in the draft. And so I was thinking that this term, if we take it in the naive understanding of the term, is a bit maybe dangerous, because for the reason that Professor Mattei says before, that the traditional community is often was often a structure built on exclusion of those persons which not belong to that community, which is built on a hierarchical power of the status members, which is the opposite of the common. So I was wondering if it can be useful to insert another point in which we try, in general terms, to sketch the kind of political and social subjects who have to manage in fact the commons, which is a community that it's not totally exclusive, but has to exclude some corporate interests, for example, but not the total exclusive. So maybe we can articulate and imagine something like that.
Just two things. First, I think that there's too much, I'm sorry, I'm really, in this sense, not in the same line. There is too much a naturalistic approach. A naturalistic approach that I found also in the Municipality of Naples document, which I think is dangerous. When you talk to something that commons are this new category, which is not new anyway, doesn't belong to a specific legal order, but it belongs to jus naturale. I'm sorry, I'm a legal positivist, and I don't want to hear jus naturale. And this is I'm really serious. It's a big, dangerous risk. I mean, if we go back to a naturalist approach, I mean, as we know, jus naturale can be everything. I mean, it's values, moral values, and I think so that bene comune is jus naturale. Someone else, and he is right, will tell me that private property is a jus naturale, and I mean, it's the mainstream, okay, Locke said it's a jus naturale. I come and I arrive and I said, no, it's res comune, it's a jus naturale. No, let's take away this naturalistic approach, even where I think, Saki, that you add this to Article 20, I don't want to see myself as part of the nature, I'm sorry. I mean, it's really too much, I feel that it's very risky to have a naturalistic approach in a legal document, because we look like we are going back to an idea of nature that has its own right, its own law, that is made by natural rights and natural law. No, let's stay in a positivistic
I won't react much
sorry, I will end. Because the other thing is that there is nothing in this document that says what is specific of commons. And specific of commons is this, that it cannot be appropriated by private or public organs. And if we don't say this, I mean, at the end of the day, we don't know exactly what these commons are. We don't know what commons are. This is the big problem. So we still have something in Article 16, something in Article 4. I think that to The problem when we went around with Ugo Mattei for the water was not that they couldn't understand that water is something that has to be common. It's when they asked, but what is beni comuni? And the only way to try to explain is to tell them that it's something that cannot be appropriated. In this sense, the document of Montego Bay, it's very clear. It's something that the state, in this case, in our case it's private property, corporation, cannot appropriate, nor the state. So it has to be something defined as free accessibility. And we have to tell this in documents, because the only way to explain people that they have to feel common what they like. Closing their eyes, they want to be not appropriated by the state and by the private corporation, and that they want to be freely accessible, which is water, what is called now public services, the free Wi-Fi, internet.
This is the logic of power, eventually.
So we have
what they want to have free from the logic of power.
Exactly. We have to write this down, to explain. And the last thing is that there was something else in an article. I think that we could, I think that it's not correct to use twice or three times European constitutional law. No, it's European law. So, I mean, either we speak about a constituent movement, so this is why we are talking about European constitutional law, but at the moment we cannot speak about European constitutional law. It's a mistake.
Okay, we have a list here, which I'm using. So it's Maribel, and then it's Horatia, and
Was about actually paragraphs 4 and 16, because I felt that they were the two times that we actually said the commons as such and such theme, but in both times we refer to it as goods or services, and I'm wondering if it also lacks the concept of participation in joint management and in governance, which you actually reference in paragraph 24 without specifically linking it to the concept of joint management by the people. So I was just proposing possibly that 4, 16, and 24 be linked, and also have a clear connection with the joint management element of the commons that isn't just the goods or the services, but
just going back, because I was going back to drafting Article 1. I sort of have a funny feeling about Article 1. I like we the people, obviously. But then it kind of looks like the recital of a directive, you know, sort of peaceful trade and cooperation in diversity. I mean, it's the sort of thing that one finds in European law all over. Couldn't it be something more? I mean, Saki was saying earlier, the commons are a question of governance, and I think that's a very, very good point. Couldn't that be expressed right in the first article? Because when you read the first article, you sort of think, oh, you know, oh no, not another human rights declaration in the same old language, you know. They're going to say it's cooperation, commonwealth, diversity, and where are we going? So it needs to be different from the sort of language that we usually have.
I totally agree.
I have a problem, philosophical, political problem with the singular definition of people of Europe. Because with the mere notion of people, I see a reductio ad unum of the constitutive multiplicity of the political. So we need to give this sense of multiplicity also when we speak about the political subject of this process. When we use the notion of people, we are completely inside the Obatian political paradigm. So we have to go beyond this paradigm.
We might do it there.
Second issue. At point 6, we speak about the resulting social disparity. I think we need a more positive, explicit reference to the issue of social justice and the idea that this battle on the commons is also a battle on redistribution of the wealth. Third, I really disagree with Costanza about the positivistic culture. Perhaps the positivistic culture has done as many damages as the jus naturale culture. Maybe we have to avoid the reference to nature, to the concept of nature. This concept is clearly inappropriate. But we need to say that our approach to the commons is an holistic approach to the issues of an ecosystem dimension. You can agree or disagree, but you are part of an ecosystem, and there is no way out. You cannot escape. You cannot escape. You are part of an ecosystem, not of a generic nature, not of a natural dimension, but in an ecosystem you are. You cannot escape. There is also this idea of this problem about community, and I understand why Lorenzo pose, both Lorenzos pose the issue of community. We don't have to think, of course, community is a dangerous, sweeping word. We have not to think to an organicistic, of course, a natural vision of community as something already existing, but we have to answer to the question, who does decide on the managing of the commons? So we have to imagine that you have a political community deciding on the commons. Who decide about the managing of water in Naples? Ugo told about before about the example of Val di Susa's struggle against high-speed train. Val di Susa is not a natural community existing before the struggle against the high-speed train. But there is a real political community forming itself in the struggle, deciding politically in this struggle about the territory as common. So we have to insert this problem. Who does decide about the managing of the commons? With the political community who has the power? Who has the power to decide? But they know this every time the same. No? Who decide? Who decide about the commons? Who decide about the commons? Okay. Last thing, please. We have to demand a European constitutional law. Keep European constitutional law not as something already existing, but as something we demand.
No, I sort of agree with Costanza when it comes to the natural law approach, especially in Naples' document, for exactly the reasons she stated, because I think, as you say, that a natural law approach risks to be sort of so vague and so charged with a very property-friendly tradition, by the way. But I don't understand why you link it to Article 20 of the draft, in the sense that natural law is a different thing than nature, in my view, and I don't even understand Pepe in the sense that it's not opportune to cite nature, I would be more radical. Instead of speaking of natural catastrophes, it's abused term.
But it's a
buzzword.
Not nature, it's Umwelt.
Okay, but whatever you will call it. I will call it the risk of extinction of humankind. That is that we're talking about. Risk of it, because the planet will survive our stupidity. The planet has survived, celestial catastrophes during its 4 billion years of history. The problem is that we will not survive. But that I think is the issue. And I don't know if we should expunge that just because we want to be elegant or we not really cite death. No, we don't want to speak about death in a document. But and I think the legal system has not really fulfilled any function if it doesn't address the problem of survival. I think it's the minimal commune, kind of function it must fulfill in order to be a legal system. So I don't know why there is this sort of antipathy for.
I can withdraw it if you like. It's okay. You convinced me. Yeah.
I convinced you.
Yes,
fine. Now I'm happy. I can go.
You can go ahead.
So that's it.
Okay, we have Silke.
Another author is gone. So
let's change it.
Just three things about the issue of fear. It is for me, or catastrophe, the avoid catastrophe metaphor. It's not about fear or wanting to be elegant. I basically think we as people are not mobilized by fears. We are mobilized by visions and good ideas. And if this is a strategy to mobilize people all over Europe, I would put the vision and potential of the commons forward. Second, it was for Lorenzo, but he has gone as well. In 16, number 16, I can see that somebody like Lorenzo mobilizing people says, if you put it as water and forest and schools and health, people understand what we are talking about. But for me, the very problem is that water and forest and schools are not the commons. This is not a commons. We have to convert it into a commons. The commons is always a struggle. So this actually is a private good because it has been embottled and sold on the market. That's the point. So we have to focus on who controls. We have to focus that the commons is something constantly reconstructed by the communities, and it can be the first thing we gain converting a thing, whatever, water and forest, into a commons is we build community and resilience. And that is the commons very potential. So I understand why people say, oh, it's so concrete to put water as a commons, but it's simply not true. And the last point was about the notion of, was for her, with Gunslow. So it was about free access. Don't put free access, please. I mean, the whole research on the commons shows that the commons, when it comes down to natural resources, is not about free access. And so sorry, it's about boundaries. It's fair access. And when it comes to non-rival resources, natural, cultural resources, social resources, obviously there is free access because there is no rivalry. But it's free like in freedom and not like in free beer. So, as Richard Stallman says. So we should avoid free access and we should avoid defining the commons as a thing. Oh, you listening?
We have Judah. And then Giancarlo, and then Rick more.
Maybe what I'm going to say is it is an aberration. But I think there is a contradiction in the objective of this charter, to my understanding. Is it something that it's the aim is to structure a popular movement and to provide like a long-term vision? And around this charter, you will aggregate different types of movements, you know, that are proposing alternatives. And, you know, trying to avoid the ephemeral existence of these movements. So like structuring something that has like a more institutional view in the terms of capitalizing the knowledge of different movements around these charters. So this could be an objective for me, and it's not clear overall. And then, okay, so the language should be completely radical, because it responds to one type of public, and it is the full right of these movements to provide themselves with this, with the language and the instruments to capitalize on their knowledge and make institutions. So you provide a long-term objective, and to avoid what I consider is to be the ephemeral aspect of some of these movements. The other thing, and this is something that it is not clear for me, it is if you are trying to touch the union with its mechanisms, the convention, the commission, the parliament, you need some compromise in language. So for me, it is something that should be chosen. You should be, I don't know if it is me that is unclear, but as I am navigating that world, I know how important alliances, compromises is. But I fully agree that the movements, they need to structure their languages and their proposal with a radical perspective in the long term. So I think if the objective is that, use the language without any compromise. You don't even need to appeal to the services of general interest.
Well, this is a very important point that requires some immediate thought. I'm completely in disagreement with this logic of either or. I think the European Union and the European Union institutions belong to me as much as they belong to who is now sitting as a bureaucrat there. So as a citizen of Europe, as the one who is actually paying them, they are at my service. And they are governed by the rule of law, okay? And that's their duty. They have duties toward me, and I'm the sovereign, they are the servants. So this is the position of this. Now the language, wait for it, because this is very, very important. Now the language doesn't need to be aggressively ideological in the worst way. It needs to talk plainly and to refer to the sovereigns, and the sovereigns is the people. And we can not use an inflammatory language, which I'm against, and get alliances that I care about with people that are moderate and concerned about democracy, the commons, and the peace, and all this kind of stuff. The bureaucrats will receive this stuff according to their procedure, and if they receive this stuff from a lot of people that actually plainly talk the language of truth, and we're not talking truth to power because we are the power. They are not the power. So we talk the language of truth and law and legality to our servants in Brussels. They need to take care of it. So I'm not going to compromise at the level of the lobbies. I'm not going to do that. I never did that in my whole life. I'm not going to start doing it now. What I'm interested in is enlarging a bottom-up political community of people that care about stuff that are important. And I know they are important. They better know they are important, because if they don't understand they are important, they're going to be kicked out. That's the point.
But you are not sure if you are going to have the support of radical movements, because yourself you said, okay, I am searching compromises with the moderates. So then there are choices, I think.
No.
No? Why not?
No, because this is the language of the law. This is the language of the law. I want to appeal, I don't want to appeal to just my little radical component. I want to appeal to people that don't vote like me. We won the referendum on water with a majority of the votes of Italians. If I was phrasing the referendum on water with the language of the left, to which I belong, we would not have won it. The left never got 27 million votes in a long, long time. So clearly we were not talking the language of the left. We were talking the language of reasonable people that thought that fundamental resources should not be there to take profit from. And we won. And that's the language we need to talk here. In a broader way, that's beginning another common sense. And building a new common sense is not right-wing or left-wing, is not radical or extremist, is talking what is a common sense that has to emerge, and we're trying to help it to emerge with a legal document. Talking rule of law. I don't know, that's what I think.
Another intervention, John Farlow.
Thank you. No, I just question to Santa Teresa, because the discussion on community, the deconstruction of the notion of community, I believe goes towards her suggestion to include differential of power among people in the Charter. So my question is, how would you practically include this suggestion, which I believe is useful? Will you do it by adopting concepts such as multitude, attitudes, which are too scholar? Or how would you explain in the document that there are differential of powers among people that must be included? Because I believe it's useful, but I don't understand how you would decline it into such a paper.
I think there are two problems that I have myself. The first is how the weakest actors, the weakest people, because they exist, could be part of a common management, of a common sharing commons with those who are stronger in a certain way. And it is, for me, there is a matter of distribution in the access as well. Because the Charter, and I think the Ugo's vision is that the commons are for equal access. But I think commons should repair unfairness. And this is for me something that is important. And so this is why I am insisting on the fact that it is important to highlight the fact that when we arrive to accept, I don't know, whatever commons is, you know, there are the unfairness, the social injustice that are there, because this is the truth. And this is why, for me, shared responsibility, but I'm not in an ideological debate, appeals to the fact that the wealthies have the responsibility to share towards the society. But this is something that it is unsolved. I think commons should be related to the concept of social justice. For instance, during the debates in Copenhagen, the Chinese wanted to have the right to equal access to the atmosphere. The atmosphere. But there the debate was in terms of, okay, if we do some calculations, they are the biggest population in the world. So they will have, you know, more access and the right to pollute. And so it's still, you know, it is related to the population, fair access. It is a demographic concept, but it's much more related to the need to solve the issue of unfairness. And if it is related not to the demography, but to the to the fact that we have to live in equal dignity, then you will have to appeal to the responsibility to those who will be the losers. And the losers wouldn't be the poorest. So for me, me, this is something that has to be reversed. Because there are, we are in a frame of, unless we change the perspective of the models of success, we are all putting pressure on the same resources. So if we change the vision and we say that there are different models of success, we will expand the type of resources we can appeal to, and then putting less pressure on the same resources. So for me, you know, this is why, you know, I reject the idea of community as such, but
I think we have lost 2 interventions, and I think we're going to conclude here.
Yes.
So we have Tommaso and Abigail.
I'm Tommaso, I'm an IT student, and I'm involved in the water campaign here in Italy. And I think that comparing this draft to the first initiative bill of water here in Italy, the bill of 2007, was based on 3 concepts, I think. The right to water, and the free access of the resource, and the participation of citizens, the bottom-up democracy. And I don't know if it's correct because I'm not a lawyer, but why in this draft there isn't the asking of recognizing the commons as a right? Because probably it's something that we can be useful to open a deal with the European Commission, because this draft must be a political instrument, and maybe this can be useful to introduce. I don't know if it's correct. It's a question.
Well, to some extent, I think it's there, and in this language of the fundamentals, necessary for the full-fledged development of the human and now the person, and putting relationship, which to get away from human rights to some extent, because we don't want to take an individualistic approach, which is one of the pitfalls of the human rights approach, right? To some extent, so we're trying to avoid it. On the other hand, yeah, maybe there is some validity in that when you frame something in a way that people understand, it's more likely to get accepted. But I think the tendency in this document was to pull away from that kind of an approach, specifically because
it was introducing more the logic of duties to our future generation than the logic of rights. You know, we are in a society that says mine, 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 mine. I have a right of this, a right of this, a right of this. That is like, you know, consume, be greedy, do whatever, and that's the logic of rights. Eventually, you know, I have to full-fledged. To be protected to accumulation, to this kind of things. So there is a conscious break, I think, with that logic in the moment in which you put relationship at the center, you put duties, you put responsibility, whatever you want. You're not like saying that there are no rights, because clearly there are, you know, aspects of personhood that should be emancipated, and so there is an emancipatory function of law and all of that. But putting on the paper yet another piece of paper that talks the language of human rights is just to be a very, I don't know, I don't think it makes sense. So that was the choice, and that's, you know, is why, in a sense, you know, I don't think that, with all due respect, the bill on water was spectacularly advanced as a solution. It was just like very basic.
Can I just follow up on this? I think that to solve this problem is stressing relationship, would be stressing the dimension of relationship as opposed to community or as opposed to individual human life is a good solution. I mean, it's an answer against the community problem, which is, yeah, sort of pre-modern romantic concept, and also a way to distance this initiative from the human rights problem, I think.
Also, relationship is about quality. Relationship is about the variety of things that are much closer to the common. Then it should be just relationship. You know, it should be a relationship that is not unjust. think we should qualify the relationship in a way that is clearly redistributive in the sense that Pepe was saying, or that even Gita was saying, no? Powerless, a relationship is not a relationship of power. Let's find a word to show the idea of a relationship that is a respectful relationship. I don't know, something that is not, because also power, exercise of power is a relationship, right? So I have power over my dog, it's a relationship in a way. That's not what we want to have here. So relationship should be qualified in some way to show that there is a need of parity, I don't know, of peer-to-peer. It was a good idea, right? The idea of a peer-to-peer relationship among peers, and everybody being kind of entitled to become a peer of everybody else. Something like that, going in that direction, I think. And that's true in education, in services, and
mutual.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Let's put some thoughts on that. But I think we have a sense that we are going in the direction that we kind of share. Yeah.
I actually was in favor of the term communities as a plural, as opposed to relationships. Or relationships is okay as well, but I think they've both got the same positives and negatives, because communities can be a source of empowerment. Like, I think there's been agreement that with the people of Europe is problematic because it excludes people who aren't citizens or who aren't residing legally in Europe. But the term communities has been used as a form of resistance. For example, you can cut relationships, you can put someone who's an asylum seeker in a detention centre. You can't cut the fact that there's a community of people who are having a similar experience because of similar global problems. Or there's a community of Indigenous people around the world who are facing, although it's diverse, similar issues. So I think if the word community is in an inclusive and participatory manner, communities as a plural, it can be used as a form of empowerment as well. And I had a proposal, if you do decide to keep Article 2 of the start of it, just with wording, that a severe imbalance of global power favouring the excessively unaccountable corporate and state sectors over inclusive and diverse and participatory community-based institutions and relationships has produced an unsustainable transfer of authority from the public to the private sector, which serves the profit of few over the interests of many.
Can you write it down and send an email? Whoever is suggesting actual language changes, I mean, we should keep the process reasonably decentralized, but also reasonably centralized for the time being. So I would think that whoever has changes to express in the language should put it in a softer form and send it to Saki.
What I will do is we will revise with the suggestions that were made, and let's create a wiki. Yeah, I mean, let's use this kind of open source platform for contributing, changing, making suggestions, asking questions, maybe even in view of the further roadmap of also involving others, right, later on, right, once we go through the process of perhaps getting it rejected on the national level, who want to understand how this relates to them. So let's start like that, make it an open process. I think this is important. Okay, so I think we're concluding. You want to make some concluding remarks? No. And I would like to thank...
This is a process. Process never reach conclusions. We're just walking different paths for a while and then we remerge.
So I'd like to thank all of the participants for coming and making the time. I'd like to thank Anthony and Ron for providing this beautiful space for us from Torino Study Abroad. I'd like to thank Emanuela Amsler, who, I don't know if she's here, for the wonderful event coordination, and thank you to the students for your participation. Thanks to everybody.